I still remember the exact sound my heels made against the marble floor of Valetti, the soft, deliberate echo of a woman who had nothing left to lose. The restaurant hadn't changed. Still dimly lit, still overpriced, still Brandon's favorite place. The same table by the window, the same red wine he always ordered. Only this time, he wasn't sitting across from me. He was sitting with her, Sienna Roth, 22, glowing pregnant, laughing like she hadn't destroyed a 7-year marriage. That's when I realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore, not like I'd expected. I was calm, because I wasn't there to cry, or beg, or spiral. I was there to finish it. With the truth. My name is Olivia Monroe. And this is not a story about heartbreak. It's a story about exposure. Have you ever had to stand face to face with the people who broke you just to take back your story? If you've ever held the truth while everyone else clapped for a lie, this story is for you. And if it is, stay with me. And subscribe to EN Reddit Story. There was us. Me and Brandon Monroe. We met at a law school networking mixer. He wasn't even in law, he worked in pharmaceuticals. But he was confident, charming, just the right amount of inappropriate. And when he leaned in and said, "You don't look like someone who tolerates small talk," I laughed harder than I should have. I think part of me knew right then he would unravel me. And I'd let him. We married 2 years later. Bought a brownstone in Cambridge. I made partner track at my firm. He moved up to regional director. It wasn't perfect what is, but it was solid. Comfortable. Full of private jokes, midnight takeout, and Sunday routines that made the world feel smaller and safer. I thought we were building something, until he started coming home late. It started small monthly business dinners, long meetings. Then it became weekly. Thursday nights, always Thursdays. I'm hitting the gym after strategy reviews, he'd say, peeling off his tie. New director. She's pushing everyone hard. The cologne should have tipped me off. Who wears cologne to the gym at 8 p.m., but I believed him. Because love makes you rationalize the ridiculous. Because trust doesn't just vanish overnight, it erodes quietly. I'd cook dinner, set his plate aside, and tell myself it's just a phase. He's stressed. Then one night my friend Marla from book club texted me. She didn't want to call, didn't want to be that person. But she'd seen Brandon across town at a wine bar. Cozy, intimate, with a young woman. Her hand was on his thigh. Marla whispered later, standing in my kitchen like she was delivering a death notice, and his fingers were playing with her hair. I remember nodding like a doll, just up and down while my entire life cracked open in the center of my chest. That night I confronted him. He denied it first. Of course he did. Then when I mentioned Marla saw them, really saw them, he shifted to minimizing. It's nothing serious, Liv. Just a work thing. You and I, we've been so distant lately. Distant, I was working 60-hour weeks trying to secure our future, trying to earn equity, prestige, real power. And he knew that. He said he supported it. He pretended to. 3 hours. That's how long we argued. Around and around him, evading me, begging for something real to hold on to. Then he gave it a name, Sienna. Her name's Sienna Roth. I knew the name. She was new. Marketing director. Bright, ambitious, tall enough to make me self-conscious in heels. I remembered her from a company event. She complimented my earrings, asked about my cases, smiled like she meant it, all while calculating how to slide into my marriage. Brandon said it just happened. But nothing just happens. An affair is a series of deliberate choices. 100 chances to stop, to turn around, to say no. And he didn't take a single one. That night I slept in the guest room alone, angry, shattered. I stared at the ceiling and thought of our wedding vows. How sincere he'd sounded. How tightly he'd held my hands. I thought that was rock bottom. But I was wrong. Rock bottom would come 6 weeks later, and it would come with 2 words. She's pregnant. It was a Thursday. I remember because I was making pasta, Brandon's favorite. Rigatoni with caramelized shallots, pancetta, a splash of red wine. I'd spent the whole day convincing myself that maybe, just maybe, we could talk. Maybe there was still something worth saving. I even lit candles the way I used to when we first moved in. The front door opened. Brandon stepped inside looking pale, paler than usual. His tie was crooked, his shoulders tight like a man bracing for impact. He placed his keys on the counter slowly like they were fragile. "We need to talk," he said. I froze. Not because I didn't expect it, but because deep down I already knew. He didn't sit, didn't touch the food. Just stood there blinking like he was afraid to speak the words. Then he did. "Sienna's pregnant." I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't cry. I just stood there, wooden spoon still in my hand, feeling the last thread holding my world together snap clean in half. "It's mine," he added, as if that needed clarification, as if I was foolish enough to imagine otherwise. My voice when it came was hoarse and unfamiliar. How far along, he swallowed. Almost 3 months. 3 months. That meant it didn't happen after I confronted him. It meant it was happening long before. While I was working late, grinding through depositions and appeals to secure our future, they were creating a different one. Without me. "I didn't plan for this," Brandon said quietly. I remember staring at him, really staring, and realizing I didn't recognize him anymore. This wasn't the man who held my hand at my father's funeral. This wasn't the man who rubbed my back when I had night terrors. This was someone else entirely. "I have to do the right thing," he said. "For her, for the baby, right thing." As if walking out on your wife to play house with your mistress was noble. He moved out that weekend. Didn't even take all his things. Just a suitcase, some toiletries, a drawer of gym clothes. Left the photos on the wall. Left the life we built like it was a shirt that no longer fit. I didn't chase him, didn't call, didn't beg. Because something in me had finally gone quiet. Not numb, not indifferent. Just still. The kind of stillness that comes before a storm. The divorce papers came fast. Too fast. Like he'd been preparing them before telling me. The negotiations were brutal, cold, robotic. He disputed the house, the furniture, even our wedding china. He didn't want it. He just didn't want me to have it. And through it all, I stayed calm. Because I knew something he didn't. I knew the law. I knew how to wait. And most importantly, I knew how to pay attention. Because people like Sienna, they always slip. Eventually. I saw her again during our second settlement meeting. Sienna came with Brandon glowing in a tight cherry red dress that clung to her bump like a trophy. She didn't look remorseful. She looked triumphant. And yet something was off. She kept glancing at her phone, fidgeting, stepping out to take calls. Brandon tried to explain it away. "She's nervous about the baby," he mumbled. But even he didn't look convinced. I just watched, quietly. Because sometimes silence is the sharpest blade. Then it happened again. At our court hearing, Brandon's best friend Cole Winslow showed up. They'd known each other since Stanford. Cole had always been a presence in our lives. Birthdays, Super Bowl parties, even helped us paint the guest room when I got promoted. But something about him that day wasn't right. He looked pale, like he hadn't slept. And when he walked toward us in the hallway, Sienna literally turned her back. "Excuse me," she muttered and darted to the restroom. I saw Cole flinch. It was subtle, but it was there. Brandon didn't seem to notice, but I did. I stored it away like a file in a cabinet labeled pending. Because I knew that kind of avoidance wasn't random. It was guilt. It had a shape I recognized. That same afternoon, I passed by the hallway outside the mediator's office and heard Sienna's voice. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but her voice carried. "Just keep it together a few more months. He has no idea." I froze. I couldn't hear the reply, just her words floating careless. When she re-entered the room, she smiled at me. Polite, vacant. Like she hadn't just been whispering secrets that had weight. Brandon placed his hand on the small of her back like she was porcelain. I stared at them both, and thought to myself, he has no idea. But maybe, now I did. There's something about betrayal that sharpens you. You stop assuming, you start noticing. The way someone lies with their eyes, the pauses in their answers, the energy in a room when someone enters and someone else tenses. I began looking backward at the timeline, at the way Brandon changed, yes, but more than that, at how Sienna entered his life. Marketing director, yes, but new, too new. She'd only been with the company 4 months when I met her at that picnic. That same month, Brandon stopped looking me in the eyes. The same month our Thursday gym nights began. It wasn't a random spiral. It was premeditated. But the worst realization, Sienna wasn't just reckless. She was strategic. And I couldn't prove it yet. But someone else could, someone who'd been there all along watching it crumble from the inside out. I just didn't know yet. He was about to knock on my door. It was a Tuesday night when the doorbell rang. 9:32 p.m. I remember because I was still at the kitchen table sorting through legal documents and unpaid water bills I barely cared about anymore. The house felt too quiet, too clean, like something sacred had been scrubbed out of it. I peered through the peephole. Cole, hair disheveled, shoulders slumped, eyes red-rimmed. He looked broken. I opened the door without a word. "Hey," he said hoarsely. "Can I come in?" I nodded and stepped aside. In the kitchen, I offered him wine without asking. He nodded. I poured 2 glasses and slid one toward him. His hand trembled as he lifted it. "I've been trying to live with it," he whispered. "But I can't. I can't lie anymore." I said nothing, just waited. "It's about Sienna," he continued, eyes fixed on the granite countertop. "And the baby," my stomach twisted. He exhaled sharply like the words were acid in his throat. "The baby? Might be mine." I didn't blink, not because I wasn't shocked, but because my body refused to move until the rest came out. "We were together," he said. "Before she started seeing Brandon, at least I thought it was before." When I asked, "Christmas party," he replied. "Last year, Brandon left early for a flight. Sienna and I ended up talking at the bar, and one thing led to another." I inhaled slowly. "And it wasn't just one time, was it?" He shook his head. "We kept meeting, for a couple months. Then, she ghosted me. No explanation. Next thing I know, Brandon's telling me they're seeing each other." "You didn't say anything to who?" he said bitterly. "To Brandon. Hey, I was there first. I figured she'd picked him. So I let it go. Until she got pregnant." He nodded. "She's been texting me again, late at night, saying things like, 'I made a mistake. We should talk. The baby kicked, you should feel it.'" He pulled out his phone, passed it to me. The texts were real, heartbreaking, manipulative. One of them, "This should have been our story to share, not mine and his." Another, "The baby looks just like you in the ultrasound. He has your nose. We need to figure this out." I handed the phone back, heart pounding. "Have you told Brandon Cole looked like he wanted to disappear? How can I? He's painting the nursery. He's reading baby books. He bought a minivan." I stared at him. "You're here because you can't live with the lie anymore." He nodded. "You have proof." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled folder. Photos, hotel receipts, emails, all dated within the window of conception while Brandon had been at conferences. My fingers tightened around the folder. Then something clicked. "There's more, isn't there?" I asked quietly. Cole looked surprised. "You wouldn't be here just because of receipts." He hesitated, then opened his phone again. A video. Sienna's face filled the screen, laughing softly, her voice sultry private. "Hey you, I miss seeing you. We need to figure this out before things get too complicated. The doctor says it's a boy. He looks like you in the ultrasound. Ethan has no idea. He's so caught up in the daddy fantasy." The video ended. Silence hung in the air like a held breath. "I wish I never met her," Cole whispered. I stood up slowly, something cold and sharp taking form inside me. "No," I said. "She's the one who should regret meeting us." He looked at me. "You have all this?" I nodded. "Does she know you have it?" He shook his head. "No. I just kept collecting it." I didn't know what to do. I sat back down. "I heard from a mutual that they're having a celebration dinner," I said. "This Friday, at Valetti's, to celebrate the divorce being finalized." Cole winced. "Yeah, Brandon invited me." I said no. I couldn't sit through it. I looked at him. "What if we both went?" He blinked. "You want to confront them?" "No," I said. "I want to end this, because some lies are too big to bury. Some truths deserve to be witnessed." The night of the dinner, I didn't dress to impress. I dressed to end things. A navy blue sheath dress, no sequins, no flash, just clean lines and power. The same dress I'd worn the day I won my first court case. The day I realized I could stand in front of anyone and not flinch. Cole was waiting outside Valetti when I arrived. He looked like he hadn't slept, tie askew, pale, but his jaw was set. "You sure?" he asked. I nodded. We walk in. We say what needs to be said, and then we walk out. He glanced down at the manila envelope in my hand. Inside screenshots, emails, hotel receipts, text messages, and that video. Truth on paper and screen. The hostess recognized me. "Mrs. Monroe," she said, then caught herself. "I mean Miss Monroe." "I'm here for the Callaway," I corrected myself. The Monroe Roth party. Private room. Her eyes flickered, but she let us in. The laughter hit us first. Soft jazz playing, glasses clinking, warm light. Sienna was seated at the head of the table, her baby bump visible beneath a crimson silk dress. Brandon beside her, champagne flute in hand. His smile faltered the moment he saw us. The room fell silent, like someone had hit mute on a perfect evening. "Olivia," Brandon said, stunned. "What are you doing here?" Cole stepped beside me. "Change of plans." I smiled, calm as the sea before a storm. "We brought a gift." Sienna's face tightened. "This is a private dinner." "Oh, I know," I said gently. "But you're celebrating. And it turns out there's something you should know about what you're toasting." I stepped forward and placed the folder on the table. Brandon stared at it, hesitant. "What is this?" Cole's voice was steady now. "Something I should have told you months ago. Sienna and I were together, before she got with you." Sienna gasped. "That's not true. I thought the timing didn't overlap," Cole said. "But I was wrong. And now that she's pregnant, I need you to know it might not be your child." The silence turned cold. Brandon's face went blank. "You're lying," Sienna hissed. "Am I?" Cole asked, pulling out his phone and handing it to Brandon. "Check the messages. The ultrasound she sent me. Her telling me the baby looks like me. The receipts from the hotel while you were in Phoenix." Brandon scrolled, hands shaking, then stopped. His face drained of color. Sienna lunged. "He's twisting this. It was over between us before I met you. He's bitter." "Then explain this," I said, holding up the ultrasound printout. Brandon took it, read the handwritten caption. "Baby looks just like Cole." Thank God it's not Brandon's nose. He looked up at her. "Sienna, is this true?" She didn't answer, just stared at the floor. Someone near the back murmured an excuse and stood. Then another. The guests began leaving in a slow, shameful trickle, like smoke evacuating a fire. "I left my wife for you," Brandon whispered. "I destroyed my marriage for this." Sienna's mask cracked. "Please? You were already bored." "I just gave you a reason." I didn't flinch. "Because this wasn't about me anymore. This was about truth being heard loud and unedited." Brandon sat, palms pressed to his eyes. When he looked up, his face was streaked with tears. "Were you ever going to tell me?" he asked them both. Cole lowered his eyes. "I didn't know for sure. Until recently." Sienna turned to Brandon. "You're not thinking straight. Let's just go." "No," he said, voice flat. "I'm not going anywhere with you." She scoffed, grabbed her purse. "Fine, your loss." "There are plenty of men like Cole," Brandon snapped. The room stiffened. Cole winced. "Bran, you knew I loved her, and you said nothing. I thought it was over between us. And when I realized it wasn't, I was already too late." Sienna scoffed, already walking toward the door. "Enjoy your pity party. I'll be just fine." She left without another word, just the click of her heels fading behind her. I stood there a moment longer, watching the man I once loved fall apart in front of me. "I'm sorry," Brandon whispered. "I'm so sorry, Olivia." "I know," I said softly, "but sorry doesn't undo anything." He reached for my hand, and for one brief second I let him hold it. It felt like touching a ghost, real once, gone now, and I wasn't going back. 8 months have passed since that night at Valetti, since the moment Brandon's world shattered the same way mine once had. Only difference, I didn't cause his collapse. I simply refused to protect the illusion anymore. Sienna left Boston 3 weeks after the dinner. Word was she moved back to Oregon, closer to family. Closer to her next mark, maybe. The baby Liam was born 2 months later. 8 pounds 4 ounces. Cole sent me a photo. The resemblance was undeniable. His eyes. His chin. There was no room left for doubt. Cole did the right thing. He stepped up. He's not with Sienna. Too much damage, too much deception, but he's in Liam's life. Present, responsible, soft-spoken, and careful in a way I hadn't seen in him before. Brandon, he transferred to the company's Seattle branch. Quietly, no fanfare. Just gone. We don't talk much. Maybe a birthday text. A forwarded article about divorce law. Nothing personal. Someone told me he's in therapy, trying to understand why he let it all unravel the way it did. I hope he finds answers. I hope he finds peace. As for me, I didn't expect Logan Shaw to come back into my life. College boyfriend. The what if I never really unpacked. We bumped into each other at a legal tech conference in Chicago 6 months after the divorce. Lunch turned into 3-hour conversations. Coffee turned into Sunday mornings, with his daughter Emily playing in my backyard garden, while he built IKEA furniture and cursed under his breath. We bought a modest house in the suburbs. It has a crooked fence, a creaky step, and just enough space to breathe. We're planning a spring wedding, just family, just truth. Sometimes when I think about those 7 years with Brandon, I wonder if they were wasted. But then I remember they taught me how to survive betrayal. They taught me how to listen to my instincts. They taught me what love shouldn't feel like. That's not a waste. That's a foundation. And if I'd never walked through that fire, I wouldn't have known how to choose someone like Logan. Someone who shows up with groceries, remembers the way I take my tea, and makes space for my silence. So no, this was never a story about revenge. It was a story about truth. About what happens when you stop shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. About letting go of the version of yourself who begged to be chosen and becoming the woman who chooses herself. The night I walked into Valetti, I didn't go there to destroy. I went to reclaim. And in doing so, I closed a door that had been weighing on me for far too long. Some endings are ugly, some are quiet, but the best ones. The best ones make room for something better to grow. And that is what this was. The end of who I was, and the beginning of who I became. What would you do if the people who shattered your life stood in a room full of applause and expected you to stay silent? If you've ever been replaced, betrayed, or erased, remember this. You don't need to yell to be heard. You don't need revenge to find peace. Sometimes showing the truth is enough. Olivia didn't come to ruin their celebration. She came to reclaim her place in the story and walk out with her dignity intact. So tell me, would you have walked in Drop a Truth Always Wins if this story hit home? Comment where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to EN Reddit Story for more true stories that bring silence to justice.